We're cultivating red paintbrush here, Castanea miniata. It's a relative of the golden paintbrush, and we're cultivating this because it's one of the native species on prairies in this region, and we're establishing new nursery beds, propagation beds here at our PRI Native Plant Center. The red paintbrush, like its cousin the golden paintbrush, is a hemiparasitic plant, which means that it thrives by having its roots attached to the roots of neighboring plants, certain types of plants, and then gaining some of the nutrients that way. So when we plant these into a propagation bed, our nursery bed, we will plant them next to Eriophyllum lanatum, which is the Oregon sunshine. And so each of these trays is about 100 plants, and we've got several down here and over there, but we'll have enough left over after planting in our nursery beds to plant some out into the prairie and possibly share with some other restoration efforts on the island or in the region. So here we've got blue-eyed Mary, and the scientific name is Collinsia parviflora, and this is short spur sea blush, a type of sea blush, and it's called Plectritis brachystemon. And the reason that there's interspaced with empty plugs is that these are actually transplants from a bed where we directly seeded into those nursery beds last fall, and this spring they came up, and they came up too thick in the nursery bed. We had to thin them, just like you plant your corn and then you thin it, you plant your beans and then you thin them, and instead of just throwing them out, we put them into plugs, and we can establish other beds or put them out into the prairie. These are species that are new to us in terms of being cultivated by us and grown in our propagation beds. This comes through a partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and several organizations down in what we call the South Sound, south of Olympia, that are doing great work as well on restoration and seed propagation. This one, the short spur sea blush, actually we have on our site, and we're using our own local genetics. This one, the Collinsia parviflora, we got from off-site, but close by on Whidbey Island, with permission to go on some private lands and collect seeds. So this will be a new addition to our site. Certainly it was here back when all these prairie ecosystems were connected on Whidbey Island, but we're reintroducing it here on our site. It'll be part of the palette of colors and shapes. This is Western Buttercup, not to be confused with the creeping buttercup, which is found in more moist areas, very predominant in South Whidbey. But this is a native plant that prefers drier open spaces, prairies, if you will. We have a lot of this on our site. It's an important species. It's one of the earliest bloomers in the spring, and we're growing it to increase our number of seeds. As we restore our prairie here at PRI, typically around 4 or 5 acres at a time in a unit, we need at least 15 to 20 different species of seeds to get the diversity in that mix to get it set off on the right step. And so this is one of our limiting species in terms of numbers of seeds. Fortunately, we've got several landowners on the island that have buttercup on their property, and they let us come on and collect and then let them know when we're done collecting seeds so they can mow or turn the horses in. So we're blessed in that regard by having a number of collaborating families throughout central Whidbey. Western Buttercup is a native species that prefers dry upland prairies like we have here, as opposed to the creeping buttercup, which has larger flowers and typically larger leaves and may appear to be quite robust compared to this plant. And the creeping buttercup, you can find it in wet areas in central Whidbey, but mostly it's in the southern part of the island, and that is not to be confused with this one. That the creeping buttercup is an invasive weed. What we've got here is Showy Fleabane and field chickweed. People sometimes recoil at the thought of chickweed, but this is a native plant that's adapted to this area, and it spreads, but it doesn't spread like wildfire. Field chickweed flowers in the spring, and it's a beautiful white flower, and it's a fabulous ground cover. It will choke out other weeds. And in the case of fleabane, it looks like a purple daisy, and it blooms later in the year. These are both critical signature species, foundational species for our restoration here at PRI and throughout the Sound. In a partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we're involved in a project that encompasses the entire Puget Sound region from south of Olympia up to the Canadian border. We're one of a number of restoration organizations that are exchanging genetics, growing different species for each other that they may not have on their site. And so this showy fleabane and this field chickweed, as well as several other species, are being grown for South Sound projects. So this is one of the income streams that PRI has. Of course, we rely on the generosity of volunteers and individual donors, but we write grants as well. And through grants and other means, we can sell some of our native plants and generate some much needed income for our overall program. Yarrow is another native plant on our site. You see it throughout the prairies and the roadsides of Whidbey Island. Kind of a tall, almost 3-foot tall plant with white flowers at the top. And Oregon sunshine, otherwise known as woolly sunflower, is another beautiful plant that you see around roadsides and on our site. It's one of our keystone species. It is commonly used as a host plant for golden paintbrush and red paintbrush when you're either outplanting them onto the prairie or establishing them in your nursery beds so that you can collect more seeds. We have quite a number of nursery beds. Many of these species are in our different nursery beds, our propagation beds. This is yarrow, and occasionally we'll coax them out of the tube to see how the roots are doing. You learn by experience after a while, but you can see that the roots they're going for the water. You see how the soil is actually a little bit more moist down there at the bottom, and the roots are literally almost all the way to the bottom. And so we don't top water these anymore because of mold issues, and we water from the bottom, but these will be ready to transplant out before too long, certainly a matter of a couple of weeks, because some are a little bit smaller, but these are almost ready to go. We have about 6 species that we're growing for restoration at the Ebey's Reserve Overlook as well. PRI has signed a 5-year cooperative agreement with the National Park Service, and we're providing some genetics and are involved in restoring the Overlook area. It's almost a 3-acre area, a lot of visitors, and so we'll have about 5 or 6 species of flowering plants, as well as thousands of fescue plants will be planted out there in April. And so we're excited about that partnership and our ability to contribute beyond just our site here. A number of the species here at PRI are bulb-forming species, lilies, things like that. So we have the chocolate lily, the camas lily. We also have more unusual varieties. This is called Tritolea, or bicolor Tritolea, and it's very rare on Whidbey. We may have the only population on all of Whidbey Island. It's more common in eastern Washington. We also have the blue flag iris, and that's common in different parts of the island, and it's also present here. What we're doing here is we're starting with very small bulbs or corms from the different plants and propagating them in the greenhouse until the bulbs can get of adequate size. Then we'll put them in raised beds outside and grow them for perhaps 1 or 2 more years, and then they'll be very, very large for outplanting into the prairie, into restoration projects. So this is a multi-step process, and this is with the Tritolea, and we've got definitely some blue flag iris, harvest brodea, several types of onions. Romer's fescue is a signature species on our prairie. And many prairies around the Pacific Northwest. If you have Romer's fescue in an area that hasn't been disturbed by development in recent years, it's quite possible that that's a remnant of some prairie land. It's truly a signature species, and we have it here on our site in our prairie remnant, as well as other parts of the property. We grow it out almost every year for our own purposes, as well as for restoration projects throughout the Sound. In fact, this is about 11,500 plugs. Each circle is a plug, and there's 67 per tray. This is about 11,500 plugs, of which about 7,000 will go to Eby's Reserve, where we're working on a cooperative agreement. We have a cooperative agreement with National Park Service to help restore the Eby's Overlook. You'll notice that some are doing better than others, and we use different seed lots to plant these, and so we've found that clearly these two seed lots were not as robust. They didn't have as high of a germination rate, and so we overseeded them, and they're catching up to these better ones now. So in a couple of weeks, these will look much better. But it happens when you clean seeds and you store them. You have different humidity, temperature, other challenges, and sometimes you get a batch that doesn't do as well.